This is our APCS video number 2, and in preparation for this video you should have downloaded and installed the Java SDK and also our programming environment that we're going to be using this year called Eclipse. And so what you'll see here is when you download Eclipse, Eclipse doesn't install like a normal program. It actually resides locally just in a folder, so therefore perfect for mobile use. You can save Eclipse and run it from a flash drive if you choose. And so I have the folder on my desktop here. Now, before I open up Eclipse, there's two things we want to kind of do ahead of time in preparation. The first thing is I would like you to download a file off our class website called Van Arnhem Prefs, and you can see this has an extension of .epf. And what this can allow us to do is kind of set up the defaults for our programming environment Eclipse. Now, Eclipse has so many preferences, very daunting for a beginner, and it's because Eclipse is very powerful. It's used from beginning programmers all the way to experts, and we would like everybody really to kind of be looking at the same thing. When you're watching my videos, I'd like your screen to look like mine, so I'm going to suggest that you at least start for the first quarter with my preference files, and as you learn more about Eclipse you can kind of experiment on your own. So please download that, and I just saved it here to my desktop. And the other thing we're going to do is we're going to create a folder, which is what we're going to call a workspace, which is where all our projects reside in. I think Eclipse might provide you with a default workspace, but we want to create one of our own. You might want to save this to your flash drive, wherever you're going to kind of house your files. And so I'm just going to put it on my desktop for now, for this video purposes. So I'm just going to create a new folder, and we'll just call it Quarter 1. And now I'm ready to open up Eclipse. So I'm going to click into the folder here and click on the application, and you might get the security warning. You can run Eclipse, it's safe. Now, depending on if you're running Eclipse for the first time or if you've associated a workspace with it already, you might see something a little bit different. If it comes up with the workspace launcher, you're going to actually associate it with the Quarter 1 folder we just created. If you give me 1 second, I'll get to that point. If you've already associated Eclipse with a workspace, it might just open like mine did. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into File, and I'm going to go to Switch Workspace, and I'm going to click on Other. And now I'm really at the point where you might be if you just launched Eclipse for the first time. And so what I want to do is go and browse for that folder that I created here. So you can see there's my Quarter 1 folder. And I'll click OK, and it should be reflected here in the workspace, and then I can just say OK. And now it might, if you already had a workspace associated with it, it might have to relaunch Eclipse to reassociate to that new workspace. And so take me a second to get it back open. Here, I'll maximize it, and now we have this workspace associated. And now if I reopen Eclipse, close it and reopen it, it should automatically be associated with that workspace, and I shouldn't have to redo that until perhaps Quarter 2. Alright, so now the second thing is we want to take and install those preferences into our workspace, and those preferences are unique to each workspace. When I save those preferences, it'll only be for this workspace. If in Quarter 2 I want to use that same set of preferences, I'll have to download that file from the website. So here's what we're going to do. We go to File, and we're going to say Import. And we want to click on the general choice there, and you can see Preferences. And then I'll just say Next. And then I can browse for that Preferences file, which should be on my desktop here. And I'll just click Open. And by default, it'll say Import all the preferences, and I can just say Finish. And there we go. It doesn't seem like anything happened, but you'll know right away. I'll tell you a key way to know that if this worked for you. Alright, so I'm going to click to close the welcome screen. We don't really need that, although you can play around and check out the tutorials if you like. And now you kind of see our program environment. And this is the environment we're going to work in most of the year. And so what we're going to do is we want to create our first project. As a rite of passage of every new programmer, you got to write a HelloWorld program, and so that's what we're going to do. So we're working in a workspace now, and so here's how the organization works. The most general organization is a workspace where it's going to contain multiple projects. Then within that workspace, you're going to create as I just said, a project. Now, a project is really going to be one programming assignment that I give you. Now, initially, those projects might only really contain one file, but later on, they'll contain multiple files, maybe sound files, images, and so forth. So we need to create a project. So I'm going to go down to File here, and I'm going to say New. And you can see I have really two choices near the top here, Java Project or Project. We're going to choose Java Project, and we're going to give it a name here. Name it whatever you like. Here it's pretty much creating itself a folder, so any kind of naming convention for folders is what you really have to stick to here. So we can just call this HelloWorld, and this is a folder, and just like a folder on your desktop, you can put spaces in it. Now, naming is going to get a little tricky, and we'll talk about it for kind of the files and so forth, but here it's just a folder, so call it whatever you like. And I'll accept all the defaults. Some of the preferences that we imported in the Van Arnhem preference file kind of takes care of all these settings. So I can just say Finish. And now I have my project set up. Now, really, a project is just a folder also that's going to kind of automatically associate all the files we put in it together. And so what I want to do is I want to create now here, and I can go to New, and I'm going to create a new class. Now, a class, there's more to classes than what I want to get into here, but essentially you can think of a class as just a Java file. And there's a little bit more to it, but we'll think about that later. And so when we create this Java file, this class, we got to name it also. And now here is where we got to really talk about conventions. And by the way, conventions are just ways we all agree to do it. It's not a syntax thing. If you choose to do it a little bit differently, it might not actually be a problem. But to make code more usable, programmers have decided to have this kind of universal, agreed-upon way of doing things. And I really, really, really want you to stick to convention. So one of the conventions is when you're creating a file or a class that you would start it with a capital letter. So I'm going to call this one, again, HelloWorld. That's going to be our actual class. Now, unlike the project name, which was just a folder, this file can't have any spaces. So sometimes people use underscores instead of spaces. You might have seen that if you've done some programming before. But what kind of the Java convention is to use what's called Camel Case. And Camel Case, as you'll see here, is really just a way of concatenating or putting together all the words. If there's multiple words for the file name, putting them together, smashing them together, but using capital letters in between. There's where the camel idea comes in, because you got lowercase, then capital, then lower, kind of like humps of a camel. And you just smash them together, and you can still kind of read that there's two words there. And now there's some other settings here that maybe down the road you can kind of play around with, but for the most part we're going to just take the default here, so we're just going to say Finish. And now what we have, after a second, is our file that we're about to create. It should show up in my main programming window here in the middle of my page. Now, you'll notice that it automatically came up with this, what's called a class header, public class hello world. Now, you need to know that class header. You need to be able to write that yourself. Eclipse is doing some things automatically here for me. You're going to have a quiz early on here in the quarter. That's going to be you remembering this bare bones programming that we're about to write. Now, down the road, we'll also talk about maybe why did they put this blank line in front of our class header, because we could actually get rid of this blank line right now. So I'm just going to click delete, because our header can be really in the first line here. Now, besides our header, which you need to remember these words, and one of the problems with Java as an introductory language people feel is that you have to do so much to really get a basic program. And so we'll talk about what each of these words mean. Now, a class is, again, just a Java file. So we're actually defining this class, and Hello World is the name of our class. And so whatever we typed in there for the name of our file will show up here. All right. So then every class is going to have these curly braces. And think of these curly braces as really kind of blocking characters. They block code together. So a class or a file, a Java file, is really a block of code. So it needs to be enclosed in these braces. And these braces should always match up. And so Java, or Eclipse really, will do a good job of helping you match these braces up. So you can see they kind of are at the same level. Now, when I go inside these braces, now this is where my code would reside. Now, one of the things that we're going to do by convention, again, Java doesn't really care. You could program this whole program on one single line, but that's not going to be very readable for anybody else. So one of the things we do is we use kind of some indentation to really highlight and make the code easier to read. So I'm going to hit Tab here. Now later on, the Eclipse will kind of do some of this for me, but that first one I'm going to hit Tab. And so within this file, we're going to have what's called a method. And a method is another just kind of block of code. It's not like a class that's the whole file itself, but it's a block of code within the class that has kind of a function. And early on here, I'll change the rules of the game a little bit when we're talking about applets and so forth. But for our programming applications, you must write what's called the main method. And this main method is really a block of code that really just tells Java where to start executing. Alright, and so as I start typing here, this main method is going to have a header just like our class had a header that was public class HelloWorld. And you need to remember all these words pretty precisely. Now, as I type, you can see Eclipse has this kind of built-in editor that'll tell me when there's a problem. So if you see an X here on the left, that means right now there's a syntax error. And so we won't worry about it because we're not nearly done typing here. So the method header, this block of code header, would be public static void main. And I'll stop here for a second. I got more. You can see I put some parentheses here. Now, we'll get to what all of these words mean, but the words like public and static and void, for right now, don't worry about it, but they need to be there. So you got to remember them. They're all key words. Now, main is a little different. That's actually the name of our method. And normally you get to choose what you want to call these methods, but main is the one that Java is looking for to run. So you must name this main, and capitalization is key. We talked about by convention that your class name should be capital. Well, by convention, all methods should actually start with a lowercase letter. So therefore, the person that invented Java also made sure that the main method followed convention and is lowercase, and so this one is, I would say, even more the convention. It's a syntax. If you capitalize that M, you're in trouble. Alright, so the other thing you'll notice as we write methods is all methods will be followed by parentheses, and these parentheses are for arguments, things you might pass to the method to do its job, or the method might accept in. Now, we'll talk more about this, and I know I'm throwing a lot at you, so just trust me, these are the kind of the steps for the bare bones project, and a lot of this will come out later, and we'll talk more specifically about it. So the arguments that we need here are string, and it's got to be capitalized. As I said, Java is very strict about capitalization, so we'll put some brackets here. Now, in this header line, everything to this point had to be exactly as I've typed it. Now, the one thing that you have a choice of is what I'm about to type here. This is actually a variable name. Now, by convention, kind of dating back to C and C++, we tend to use args, and so you'll see that as a pretty standard thing in Java. But you could name it whatever you want. It's a variable name. You could name it Fred or pizza or whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. And then I'm going to hit enter at the end of this line. You notice that it had automatically in Eclipse given me the closing parenthesis there when I hit enter for the opening one. And one of the things you'll notice is that when I hit enter, Eclipse knows that you want to follow this indentation convention, so it automatically indented. And as we said, a method is a block of code, kind of like a class, so we're going to use these curly braces. Make sure you use curly braces here. And I'm going to hit enter, and so that's going to block the lines of code in my method. And notice Eclipse is really nice. It gives me the closing brace to keep these matched up. One of the things that will really cause you some headaches is not matching up the braces. That's one of the reasons why we use indentation in the way we are, to be able to kind of match up braces really nicely and easily. Now you'll notice that my X's went away here on the left of my program. And the reason is because this right here is the really minimal Java program that actually would compile and run. Now, the problem is it's not a very exciting program because it really does nothing. And so usually, as a first program, we want something that would actually do something, and at minimum we want to print out to our kind of console window. And so again, we need one more line of code here. And again, be very careful with capitalization. That's system word, which by the way is a class. If you hover over it, Eclipse does some things for you. It'll tell you a little bit about what these are. So you can see if I hover over it, it'll tell me it's a class, kind of like the one we wrote, HelloWorld, but this is one that's predefined in Java. And so somebody has already written it. It's in our Java library, and we can use things that are inside it. So we'll talk much more about that down the road, but just to give you some idea. But it's very important that you follow the convention here. So that's capital S because remember it was class, and we said all classes are capital. And so then I got a dot here, and a dot you can almost think of as kind of like a slash in a URL. It's kind of digging deeper into the subclass and so forth. So I got dot out dot and then print line, and you know, some people say println, I call it print line there, but it's print and then ln, and then that's actually a method. And so we talked about how every method, whether you're writing it or using it, has parentheses. And so what goes in these parentheses is whatever you want to print out. Now I can print out pretty much anything I want. I can print out the number 4. I could print out even 4 plus 7, and it would print out 11. Now if you try to print out something like Hello World like this, you're going to have a problem. You can see it's probably telling me there's a problem because when you normally print out something, it would think you're trying to print out the variable called Hello World. Now, first of all, variables can't have spaces. So you might say, well, okay, let's get rid of the space. Now, it's still going to cause a problem here because Hello World, it's thinking it's a variable, but that variable doesn't exist anywhere in our program. So if you want to literally print out the characters Hello World or the words Hello World, what you want to do is you want to put quotes around it. And that tells us that it's what we call a string literal. Literally the characters in that string. Now I can actually put space here because that space is a character like any other. So now it's going to print out literally the letters HELLO space WORLD once I put it in quotes. Now you can see there's still an X here. It means there's one problem. Now every complete line in Java needs to end with a semicolon. Now, not the method header, not the class header, but a complete line. This was our first really line of code, needs to end in a semicolon. So I'll put a semicolon here to end it, and you should see my little X go away. And now that means I have a runnable program. And so we'll go up to Eclipse. The little play arrow here should say run. And if I click on it, you can see I get my message here, Hello World. So we've written our first kind of bare bones Java program.